Okay, in this video I'm going to be talking about how to do some more complex fills using the gradient tool and also how to do no fill and no stroke objects. So I'm going to start by selecting the gradient tool down here. That's G on the keyboard. And just to make sure that we're on the same page, go ahead and hit D. Make sure that you have a white fill and a black stroke. The gradient tool will apply a basic gradient to any object that you select. It's usually best to select an object first, but in this case we can just click on this object and it will apply a gradient. I'll talk a little bit more about how this gradient annotator works later, but for now let's go ahead and just open up the fill. To modify the swatch we can click the gradient options button down here. Alternatively, we can get to this by going Window, Gradient, and this will also bring it up. So the gradient window looks really similar to the one in Photoshop, and it has a lot of the same functions. We can change it to a radial gradient, to a linear gradient. I'm going to zoom in just so it's a little easier to see. We can change the angle of the gradient. I'm going to keep that at 0. We can add different colors to this and play with this. And in Photoshop, we didn't really talk about how to build custom gradients, but we're going to go deep into this gradient slider menu. So starting off, we have a white swatch here and a black swatch here, and these can be clicked and dragged, and you can see the effect there. We're saying this is the stop for this. This is when it changes completely to that color. So whatever color this is, it's black right now, that is the point in the gradient when it will switch to that color. So if we drag the white one, it'll switch to that. Now this top is transitional stop that will allow us to change how drastic or how quick or how smooth it changes from one color to the other. So we're saying, okay, here's point A, it's white, here's point B, it's black, and then there's this, which we're moving back and forth. Now let's say we want to create a 3-color gradient. So we're going to go from white to black and then back to white again. If we just click anywhere down here where my mouse has changed to a plus, it will add a new stop. And then to modify the color, we just double click that stop. We have a full color window here, but I'm just going to choose white. And we've created a new stop. Another simple way to copy an already existing stop is to hold down Alt or Option and drag from an existing stop, and it will duplicate it. So this is really useful if you want to create a series of lines, for example. Just holding down Alt or Option on the Mac, and it's drawing a series of lines. So I can come in here and change these to a variety of different colors. We can also change the opacity here. So I could actually have our gradient go from a solid color to a less opaque color. And you can see the stroke behind it is coming through now, right? Because we're lowering the opacity. Now to remove a stop, the simplest way is to click it so that it's selected and click the little trash can icon. That will remove the stop. I'm just going to go back to a basic 3-color gradient. I'm going to change this middle color. Let's do a kind of nice blue, and let's change this side to an orange, and this side to a more intense orange. Okay, that's great. We can also reverse our gradient simply by clicking this button here. It'll flip-flop the gradient. So that's creating a custom gradient within this menu. By the way, if we want to save this at any time, we just need to click this new swatch and give it a name. I'll just call it gradient 3 or 2, say OK, and now we have our swatch created. So now that swatch is selected as our fill down here, and whenever I go to another object, I'll switch back to my selection tool and select this object. Whenever I click the gradient tool, I just have to click inside that object and it will apply that gradient. The gradient annotator is one of my favorite features inside of Illustrator. You can find it right here. If you have the gradient tool selected and you've applied a gradient, you can then use the gradient annotator. This is a live way of modifying a gradient on a per object basis. So it doesn't change our swatch. It just changes the gradient on this specific object. We can come in here and move these around. We can change our stops. We can extend it way past. We can rotate it. So this really lets us dynamically modify our gradient using the gradient annotator tool. If I switch back to my selection tool and back to this one, I can grab my gradient annotator tool again and go to town. Now let's say I want to remove the stroke or the fill from one of these objects. I could select this object, and I don't really like this border. I want it to be borderless. It's very simple. You can click the stroke color or the fill color. It works the same on both. And you just select this red line. This is the none line. So that will remove the stroke from your object. Likewise, if I remove the fill, I now have an invisible object. And let's look at what a gradient looks like whenever it's applied to a stroke, just for fun. I really like this effect. It gets this great kind of picture frame effect. So that is how gradients work within Illustrator.